Hi, I'm Aaron J. Marks of aaronjmarks.com and commercetheory.com. Welcome to my podcast, A Higher Level, where everything we think, see, and do happens on a higher level. For as long as I can remember, I felt like my mind has worked just a little differently than most others. For my entire life, I've been studying, observing, and contemplating this incomparably strange and wonderful phenomenon called human existence, and trying to figure out what it's all about. People say the way of thinking and theorizing that comes from this offers an unusually high and rich level of insight, clarity, freedom, inspiration, and effortless creativity. And that's ultimately what a higher level is all about. The insight to understand how life works, the clarity to see where to go next, the freedom to go there, the inspiration to find joy and wonder along the journey, and the creativity to honor your particular brand of human genius. In this podcast, I'm going to break down and describe the concepts that come from my theories so that you can see into the fabric of the life you're living with greater depth and precision, and use that understanding to improve your results in every way that's meaningful to you. It's the only life you get, and the only chance you have to make a difference here. If there's one thing I know, it's that all lives can improve, and that the human race is just one big collective results improving system. Ready to find your place here? Fabulous. Let's get into the topic for this episode of A Higher Level. I'll see you again afterward and talk more about what it looks like to work with me. Until then, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. This is Aaron of aaronjmarks.com. Welcome to A Higher Level. I think this is episode 41. I'll probably start to lose track of those as we get into. Well, actually, let me make a note so I know what we're always in. So, episode 41, we're in. It's the second episode of a series about my new theory of commerce, and the episodes of this series are going to unpack that. It's the five hidden layers of every human interaction. So whenever humans interact, what happens? What is motivating that? What is the goal of that? Humans exist as individuals and as groups, and so like essentially we go through our days as members of different groups and kind of behaving in groups. What's behind all that? That's what commerce theory is about. So let me tell you how I came up with this. The last series in season 2 is about the different facets of my work, and I recommend you go back and listen to that one if you haven't already. Like, there's not really a right or wrong order to listen to any of this, but that was in 2023, kind of halfway through 2023, I think that I came up with those because I I I do find it challenging to communicate the full scope, depth, and impact of the work that I do, as well as all the people that it can help. And essentially, that's what the rest of my life is going to be about: is continuing to articulate and work with the people that process of articulating it attracts. And so I came up with these different facets. Again, that's the substance of the first series of season 2, and one of them is essentially a theorist of commerce. It was a bit longer and kind of more florid than that, but I intuited that, and it's like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is true, but I also feel like there's something about that word commerce that um, resonates in a few more directions than the way that we typically use it, right? So it's like if you go up to someone and you say, "What is commerce?" They're probably going to talk about the buying and selling of goods and services, right? The exchange of things for money, right? So, if you think about the way that we like the associations we have with that word. So it's like commercials on television, they're trying to sell you something, right? So they're offering a product or service, attempting to entice you to surrender your currency, that you've accumulated through your own uh, your own offering of goods and services. And they're trying to say, oh, it's worthwhile for you to send some of that over here and benefit from the solution that we have, to some problem that you have, right? So that's commerce, right? That's a commercial. There's chambers of commerce, right? So where people meet to, kind of facilitate the process of doing that. Think about economic development. What are other connotations? I think it's like if there's a commercial district. I'm not sure that you hear that one that often, but it's like that's typically what we associate with commerce, right? Is, the idea of exchanging goods and services for money. But I like as I worked with clients and organizations and I thought about that word, it's like I had this, this intuition that there was more to that word because what I noticed was hard for me was, it's like I would talk to a client, and it's like, well, we'd be talking about their work, but it would quickly go to their family or their self-image or something about the city or something about another organization. And it's like, well, that's not directly related to um, better doing the work of buying and selling, or sorry, of selling your product or service, but it's related. So it's like, can you really separate those, all these interactions that we have with people? And so I was thinking, well, it's like I look at my marriage, I look at, the relationships I have with my parents and my children and, and my friends and, other people in my community. And it's like, well, wait a second though. Like you're doing exchanges with those people too, right? It's like we rely on each other for things, right? So it's like I look at my wife and I, it's like we have all these unspoken agreements about how we run the household, how we run our marriage, how we deal with our kids. And it's like there are agreements in place behind those. It's like we don't sit down and, like formalize them like, you do in commercial, like what we tend to think of as commercial transactions, like with a business, right? But there's a sense of balance and evenness and equal trade, all the same. So to the point that if one of us, uh, shirks something or gets too lax in certain areas, like there is a tension that arises and there is a disagreement that has to be worked through. And if those disagreements, become too malignant, too caustic, then, the agreement ultimately breaks apart and you have things like divorces, right? So, I realize it's like, well, it's not just in, the sphere of business that we do these kinds of exchanges. I think every person that you interact with, you actually have some form of exchange with. And so I looked at one point, so I go to Merriam-Webster for this because I'm fascinated by words, and so I'm always looking them up. I'm looking up definitions and etymologies, and I looked up commerce. And if you go to Merriam-Webster and you look up commerce, you're going to find three definitions. Now, the third one is fun. It's sexual intercourse, and I think that's sort of an archaic definition. I don't know that you hear that anymore. It's like, yeah, to engage in commerce with someone is, to have sex with them. But that's a form of exchange too, right? And anyone who has experienced that knows what that's like. It's a give and take. It's a back and forth. Like each party has needs, right? So, in that sense, it's like, yeah, it's quite appropriate. So in Merriam-Webster, the second definition is the exchange or buying and selling of commodities on a large scale involving transportation from place to place. So, I think you can get rid of the large scale involving transportation from place to place, and then it's the exchange or buying and selling of commodities, and because it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be place to place. Like I go to a shop on Main Street and I go in and I buy an item. That's commerce. It's not that the thing's coming from a distance, not necessarily. Maybe it is, like some of those things come from a distance, but it's like, um, to me that definition feels a little bit narrow, but it's like we can alter it to reflect the sense that in which we typically think of it, which is that buying and selling, exchange of goods and services, right? So that's the second definition, right? And oftentimes when I talk about this, and I do have business cards printed up with these definitions on the back, from Merriam-Webster, but it's like yeah, if I'm speaking to people and I say that's actually the second definition in Merriam-Webster, sometimes they get really intrigued and they're like, "Oh, okay." So I always thought that was the primary sense. So what does Merriam-Webster then say is the primary sense? And when we look at the first definition of commerce in Merriam-Webster, we get this: social intercourse, exchange of ideas, opinions, or sentiments. So Merriam-Webster sees a much broader definition of commerce than we're used to thinking about, right? And it's much closer to that intuition that I had when I worked with clients and organizations, or when I do, and see all the different, kinds of exchanges and agreements that keep people's lives shaped in the manner that suits them and the other people with which or with whom they're in exchange. So so I intuited this, and Merriam-Webster corroborated this. So let me break down that definition a little bit, because it's like essentially it's a theory of what this is, right? So social intercourse, right? So that's it's got that same word intercourse, right? We're not used to using that outside of outside of the context of sexual intercourse. But uh, really, you do come across that. If you read a bit, especially if you read older things, social intercourse. So it's not sexual intercourse; it's social intercourse. It's when you're with other people and groups of people and organizations of people. That intercourse, it's yeah, it's conversation. It's signals, it's promises, right? It's like why would I interact with this person? Like, what's the promise there? And what do I promise this person from interacting with them? That's what social intercourse is. And we're all engaging in this every moment of every day. We're social species, we're social species. We're so thoroughly social, we don't even realize how social we are. We don't realize just how thoroughly our thoughts and intentions and desires are shaped by every other human in existence and who has ever existed. Like, everyone plays a part in this. It's like it's really phenomenal and amazing what humans are, if you really think about that. And we're constantly, and the word I use is interfluencing one another, which is a way of saying that we're influencing and we're being influenced. Or another way I say it is that there's influence and there's outfluence. Influence is when it flows in. That's literally what influence means. And then outfluence is when it flows out to someone else. And the whole, kind of ecosystem of that, people doing that between one another, is interfluence, because whenever you talk to someone, you're going to influence them, or they're going to influence you too. It's inevitable. Now, the influence may be much stronger in one direction, but it's inevitable that both parties are going to be changed by that interaction of interfluence. So social intercourse, this thing we're doing all day, every day. What is it? Well, Merriam-Webster says it's the interchange of ideas, opinions, or sentiments. And this is interesting to me because, they say opinions, so it's what we think is true. It's all sort of based on what we think is true and what we think we want. And then ideas and sentiments is interesting because that breaks down along pretty traditional lines and certain theories, like you find in Myers-Briggs, of thinking and feeling. So thinkers tend to solve problems, feelers tend to want things to feel good, right? And it's hard to know where one of those begins and one of those ends, because it feels good to solve problems, and we solve problems to make our life feel better, right? And a bad feeling is a problem to be solved. So it's hard for me to see a distinction in there, although ultimately, yes, I think we can identify them. So social intercourse is, it's the constant sort of interfluence that we have based on what we think is true and based on what we think we want about how we want to feel, and the problems that we have to solve in order to get to that feeling. So that's commerce in a nutshell. I know it, Merriam-Webster knows it, so it was corroborated. But what is the ultimate kind of shape of that? And that's what commerce theory is. And it starts with like the most broad and deep kind of longing and, transcendental sense that we all have, but, we don't really talk about that often, at least not in public, not in our general interactions. There are places to do it. So, you tend to see this in religious centers, right? We talk about those things. Maybe if you have a club where you talk about philosophy, right? Maybe in therapy, like, a deep dive into your psychology, you will, come across some of these things. But, in day-to-day transactions, even if it's with your family or your, the little store on Main Street, USA, I think it all boils down to these transcendent longings. And so that's where we're going to start. And then it terminates in the behavior that we're taking right now. So like, what is our behavior? Well, I would say it's a set of systems and signals. That's the layer, like that's the surface layer. So, a system is something we build to maintain something, and then a signal is something that we used to show some kind of allegiance. That's what systems and signals are. So the five layers, from the most like deepest and transcendental to the most surface layer one, the five levels are, the five layers are, to every social interaction. They're ontology, theology, sociology, anthropology, and systems and signals. And ontology is the deepest one, and systems and signals is the one that's closest to the surface. And it's not that any of them are bad or better than the other. It's just like this is how I believe human behavior works. It can be analyzed in terms of these five levels. Sorry, layers. I got to get used to we're using the word layer because like that's the best word for it. Levels is I've used in other places, but I think layers is the best word for this. So it's like a lasagna, right? Like you have layers there, and like they all kind of mix together and create this experience of a lasagna, right? And you can peel it apart layer by layer and analyze it, and say, okay, the lasagna has this mouthfeel and this flavor because of this layer right here is ricotta cheese here, and this layer here has this kind of noodle, right? That's essentially what commerce theory does for human social interaction. So again, if you want to think about how to run a group better, if you want to think about which group to join, if you want to think about how to attract people to the group that you're in, and you want to grow that group, and essentially that's what we're all doing in some form, is trying to figure out which groups to join or start, or get other people to, or keep the wrong people out, right? Commerce theory will help you do it. So let's come back to the episode 42 and the third the third episode of this series, on commerce theory, and we'll get into the fundamental layer of not just human interaction, but of existence itself, and that's ontology. Oh, incidentally, systems and signals is the only one I couldn't think of an ology for, unfortunately. Otherwise, there would be this real seamless unity to it. Oh, let me tell you one other story about this. So I was walking in a nature preserve in October. I think it was October 2023. And I was, I was doing my coaching work and, really enjoying that. And I had this, yeah, I know. I had this inspiration and I saw all five of these layers like while I was walking. And I was like, oh, that's what commerce is. It's these five layers. They're always there. And then somewhere around that time, this may have been right before or shortly after the walk in the nature preserve, I was sitting in a local coffee shop. I do a lot of work in coffee shops, a lot of writing and editing and digital marketing for what I do right now. And I had this, this experience. It was what some people might call a numinous experience, but I suddenly looked around and everything sort of started to hum a little bit. It was like this place of peace and, this almost timelessness. And suddenly I looked at everything. I looked at all the art and, all the advertisements on the walls, all the systems that were used, the cash register and the case for the bakery items, and it all had this significance. And it was like everything here is telling a story. Everything here is going back to the very beginning of time, that you can trace all of it back if you go far enough. Everything was placed there, with an intention. Suddenly I saw it and it was really beautiful. And it's like I knew it couldn't stay there, but like I was very inspired by that. And so I knew that this five-layer theory of commerce was just a really great way to describe all of that and account for all of that and help people understand how human society works so that they can navigate it more gracefully and get better results. And that's how I came up with this theory. And I'll close this episode, this second episode, the 41st episode of A Higher Level. And I'll see you in episode 42, which is the third episode of the series on commerce theory. And we'll talk about ontology. This is Aaron of aaronjmarks.com, and I'm a commerce theorist. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me on A Higher Level. If I've done my job right, you're seeing, thinking, and acting differently, with more clarity, more decisiveness, more intention, more success. The current state of your life is just a set of results, and they can all be improved. Doesn't matter whether it concerns yourself, your family, your friends, your community, your workplace, your investments, your world. Behave differently, act differently, communicate differently, and your results will change, guaranteed. But how do you change your actions, behaviors, and communications? If you're unsure, give me a shout. I've helped dozens of motivated leaders and organizations like you and yours to improve their results by discerning exactly the right next step. It's something not everyone can do, and it happens to be my specialty. Sound like something you can use? Learn more about me in all my media channels and reach out to start your own conversation and improve your life in every way. There's nothing like it. And you're worth it, because if you're not, then no one is. Thanks again for joining me at a higher level. I'll talk to you next time, and we'll continue to see, think, and act on a higher level. Until then.